So I invite you to travel back to when you were a teenager, to really think about the environment that you were living in, what your peers looked like, what the education that you received was like, what was your family like? Was it an environment of diversity? Did you feel equipped to be able to navigate the world as you turned 18, 19, 20, begin to go out and engage? Did you feel like you had the tools? Did you feel like you were able to connect to other people? Did you feel rooted in your authentic voice and your power? The gifts that you have to offer to the world? Did anyone ever talk to you about your gifts? I know for myself, my childhood and teenage years were the opposite of a place that fostered gifts or talents. It was the opposite of diversity. I grew up in a diversity desert, you could say. Grew up in a little town that I remember one experience when I was in high school. We had one African-American kid in the entire school. And he was walking home one day, and he was walking through downtown, and there was a car that was driving by, and they threw a full soda can at him and yelled at him to go back to Africa. And I remember hearing it and just being so confused. And in my family, it was interesting because I wasn't born into overt war. I wasn't born into a place of gun violence or anything like that, but there was a subtle war that was happening. There was a huge custody battle that happened at the moment of my birth that just decimated and split my families. From that point forward, I was rotated between households, so there was never any stable sense of family or environment, and it really taught me how to disappear. It taught me how to be a really good shapeshifter. It taught me how to hide who I was and how to morph into different environments to try to just make my way through from a sense of survival. And there was a moment when I was 15 years old that I remember at that point in my life, Child Protective Services had gotten involved. There was just lots of drugs and alcohol, and there was overt abuse and violence that was happening in the home. And so they had stepped in to intervene. And I remember coming home from school and recognizing that I needed to leave, and packing my car full of everything that I could and hopping into my little old beater Subaru and driving away from my home and everything that I had known. And that was the first time that I took a step for myself, for my sovereignty, to really begin to establish myself in the world. But with that, it left me very confused. I had no skills to be able to navigate the world. Imagine stepping out on your own when you're 15 and having to fully support yourself, having to figure out how to navigate the world of career and environment and paying rent and all of these different aspects without the tools, without knowing who you are. And so later in my life, there was a moment where my biological mother, I got a call that I needed to come to the hospital, that it was urgent. So I drove the 5 hours, and I'm trying to make it through traffic to get there, and I'm totally confused. I haven't spoken to her in 7 years. By the time that I reached the hospital, she's completely jaundiced. Her entire body is yellow, her eyes are yellow, and she can't speak anymore. And I remember the confusion of like, what? There's going to be no conclusion to this story. There's going to be no sense of completion within our relationship. And I had to sit there and watch her die, and it was an awful death. She was fighting it, our entire family was fighting it, and it was awful to just witness and to feel. And I just remember there has to be something more than this. There has to be something different. There has to be a reason for living, because up until that point in my life, she passed away when I was 21, and I've been kind of acting out of the same patterns that I had seen my family in, right? A sense of disconnection, drinking a lot of alcohol, totally disconnected from myself, from my truth, from other people, not knowing how to connect in any meaningful sense. And getting to witness her death was such a powerful gift, because it awakened these questions of like, why am I here? What is the purpose of this? There has to be something more. And it catalyzed my desire to discover that, not just in myself, but to be able to serve the awakening of that in other people. So fast forward to today, I'm the executive director of what's called the Global Youth Peace Summit. And the Global Youth Peace Summit is an environment that is the opposite of what I grew up in. It's a beautiful environment where we invite 50 different youth from up to 17 different countries. These youth come from all over the world. We work with refugees, we work with immigrants, we work with youth that have been born and raised in California, we work with international youth. And we bring them together for a week-long event that's devoted to leadership development through the education of the heart. The Dalai Lama speaks about how it's essential that we have an education of the heart in these times. Because when we look around at what we're experiencing in the world, there's so much separation, there's judgment, there's division. What do we need? We need ways to unite. We need systems of respect, of diversity, of inclusion, of communication, of compassion, of connection. And the Global Youth Peace Summit offers the perfect environment to foster this, because we bring together all these youth from all these different backgrounds, so they get an opportunity to taste what it is to come from a different culture, from a different environment, to hear about different religions and countries of origins and languages, things that they may never have thought about, which begins to broaden their idea of what's possible in the world. And we have 2 invitations that we really offer the youth. One of the first ones that we offer is to come curious. Curiosity before judgment. What would it be to be curious before we judge the person that we see and where we think that we're coming from? What sort of questions can we ask to really open that sense of true connection with each other? Another thing that we do with the youth is unmasking. What are the masks that you wear? What masks do you hide behind? Think about when you were a teenager. Did you even know that masks were a thing? Even now, how often do you talk about masks in your life and the masks that we have to wear in all the different environments that we go through? So we offer them an invitation to begin to take off the masks, to speak to the masks, and then what's left. And so I want to tell a couple stories of some of the youth that have come through the program to illustrate what happens in this experience. So take Usman, for example. Usman is a young man who was born and raised in the inner city of Oakland. He experienced so much gang violence throughout his life that by the time he was in his early teenage years, he was silent. He would fade into the background, he wouldn't say a word, and he would just watch and he would just try to disappear. So he showed up to the summit like this, completely silent. He would stand in the background of all the different events. He would kind of have his eyes half closed, his lip kind of cocked, judging everything that was going on. And for 2 years, Usman was silent. Didn't say a word, didn't participate in any of the activities, didn't engage with any of the other youth, but on the 3rd year, Usman cracked. He finally began to open up about what he had experienced and things that he had seen, seeing his best friend gunned down from gang violence, getting to see the violence in his home and everything that just tore him apart, and how he just couldn't find the words and couldn't find a way to connect to other humans. Today, Usman is traveling the world. He's come back to the summit 3 different years after that as a volunteer, helping to serve and contribute to other youth. But now he's traveling the world as an acclaimed photographer for the United Nations, doing photojournalism for human rights issues. Or take Nani. Nani was a refugee that arrived here from Guatemala with her family, with her sister. And they arrived here not speaking a word of English, and she had to struggle to adjust to what it was to land in an entirely new environment, uprooted from her home, her community, her family, her friends, without knowing the language. And so she came to the summit and she began to learn that language is something that transcends what we speak. That there's so many different ways to communicate with other people. There's so many different ways to connect. And Nani began to blossom. And Nani is now an activist who travels back and forth to Guatemala. She's living on the big island of Hawaii, studying regenerative agriculture and sustainable farming. And she's going back and forth to Guatemala to educate her village where she came from, to help uplift people out of poverty, to help to give them ways to sustain themselves and their lifestyle. Or take Nadia. Nadia was a young woman. She was born and raised in California in Sonoma County, Caucasian woman. She was never really surrounded by much diversity. She was growing up pretty privileged. And through coming to the summit, she got exposed to all of these different stories and environments and experiences of youth from all over the world, from all different backgrounds. And through that opening of what she saw was possible, she's now devoted to opening up a center for sex trafficking victims, and helping to serve and educate and provide healing and ways for financial prosperity and success. So this is what happens to the youth who come through the program. They get so inspired, they become leaders for peace, inclusivity, justice, compassion, and connection. It's the medicine that our world desperately needs at this time. And I need your help. We're looking for people who can help to sustain this work, who can help support our next generation of rising youth leaders. I'm looking for monthly contributors to help to support this work. So if you're inspired to this, if you want to help to water the seeds of the future that we all believe in, that we know is possible, it's a super simple process. Take a piece of paper, fill out your name, your credit card information, and how much you'd like to give each month, and become a supporter of the youth who are going to rise up and bring a more peaceful and just and inclusive future. Thank you.